The offseason is a time where all 30 NBA teams have a chance to make moves that propel them forward and help them get on the path to success. In my last video, I went through 4 teams that I believe had sneakily great offseasons that haven't gotten as much publicity as they probably deserve, so go check out that video if you haven't already, but in today's video, we'll be heading over to the opposite end of the spectrum. In this video, we'll be going through 4 teams in particular that I believe will really regret the way that they handled things this summer, and it could end up holding them back in a big way, with their futures now even murkier than before. They all have made pretty critical mistakes that seem likely to backfire on them. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but also very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first team we'll be discussing today that will end up regretting everything they've done this summer is the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers are probably the most obvious inclusion on a list like this because the entire period for them has been filled with drama and question marks. The James Harden fiasco has been handled poorly by every single person involved, and it will likely remain a stain on their summer until it gets resolved, that is, if it even gets resolved. Harden claims he was promised that he would be traded after opting into his contract, and the Sixers front office do not want to trade him away for peanuts and scraps, so it's a standoff right now that will only end up hurting both Harden and the team in the long run, because having a guy in the locker room and around the team that doesn't want to be there is only going to bring more negativity to everyone he's around. Then, when you look at the moves the Sixers actually have made, it doesn't exactly inspire much confidence. From last year's group, the Sixers allowed Shake Milton, Jalen McDaniels, and George Niang all to leave in free agency, which may not seem like the worst thing in the world because none of them are necessarily high-level game changers, but the fact that the team didn't really replace them with anyone significant makes it even more head-scratching. In their place comes Patrick Beverley, who I will admit I do like as a signing, but that's pretty much it. And needless to say, Beverley does not cover up all of the holes left behind by those departures. The Sixers also signed Mo Bamba, while also re-signing Paul Reed and Montrezl Harrell. Plus, they brought over center Filip Petrusev from overseas, resulting in 1/3 of their current roster now being taken up by centers, creating a ridiculous logjam at the one position that you don't need that kind of depth at behind Joel Embiid. They're still good enough with Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and new coach Nick Nurse to remain in the playoff hunt for sure, but you can without question sense that something bad is brewing. The next team we'll be discussing today that will end up really regretting the way that they went about this offseason is the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are a rebuilding team that the general public have probably been most harsh towards recently because over the last 2 years they've been the worst ranked defense in the NBA, playing a brand of basketball that seemed undisciplined and unorganized. When the Rockets fired head coach Stephen Silas and brought in Ime Udoka to replace him, it was a definite step in the right direction, and they also probably made the right decision to pivot away from targeting James Harden in free agency because what Harden brings doesn't quite match up with the timeline that the Rockets are on, so early on, things were actually going down the right path. They entered free agency with a ton of money to spend and had a plan to spend it on players that could provide leadership to their young talent and help them win enough games to maybe crack the play-in tournament, but their execution on this plan didn't quite come through. Brook Lopez was a player that they made a big push in free agency to try to get to steal him away from Milwaukee, and if they had landed him, I would have loved their offseason, but they didn't. Missing out on a veteran elite rim protector hurt, and then they chose to give out arguably the 2 biggest overpay contracts of the entire summer to Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, just to make things worse. VanVleet is coming off of a down year where his shooting and overall efficiency took a nosedive, and after the Rockets drafted Amen Thompson, he's also in Thompson's way on the depth chart now, and Dillon Brooks just got booted out of Memphis for being a distraction who doesn't back up his antics with his play on the court, so I just don't think bringing him into a young locker room is a good idea at all. They're still not good enough to make a significant step forward in a loaded Western Conference either for the ultimate cherry on top. The next team we'll be discussing today that will look back on this offseason with regret is the Chicago Bulls. 2 years ago, the Bulls looked like a team that was positioning itself to contend at the top of the Eastern Conference with the moves that they were making. They traded for then All-Star Nikola Vucevic, they acquired DeMar DeRozan for more star power on the wing alongside Zach LaVine, and they brought in Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso, and for a while, they had a dangerous and well-rounded group that was sitting near the top of the conference standings for a stretch during the 2022 season. However, that didn't last very long. The season ended with a first-round exit for them, then they followed that up by missing the playoffs entirely this past season. A few of their key players were hitting free agency this summer, they seemed unlikely to be able to swing a game-changing addition, and both Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan had plenty of other rumors swirling about potentially being on the trade block. The worst place that you can be in the NBA is locked into mediocrity, and that's exactly where the Bulls are at right now, so it would have been in their best interest to start shifting their focus to the future, but instead of doing that, they doubled down and chose to run it back. They gave Nikola Vucevic a contract extension for 3 more years, they re-signed Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu, they held on to both Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, and their biggest addition was Torrey Craig? You have to ask yourself, what is the end goal here? And the Bulls don't really have a good answer to that question. Absolute best case scenario for them is a first round exit from the playoffs, and realistically, they're probably in for another year without a playoff berth at all, while also watching their most valuable assets depreciate. I don't understand their decision to run it back at all, and I know it will cost them in the long run. And finally, the last team we'll be discussing today that will end up really regretting the way they went about this offseason is the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors are actually in a pretty similar situation to the Bulls. Since winning the title in 2019, they've been steadily trending downward in the standings. Every year they seem to lose another key contributor, going from losing Kawhi Leonard to Kyle Lowry to Fred VanVleet this summer, and after missing the playoffs entirely this past season, they too are now stuck hovering in mediocrity. What lands the Raptors on this list today is the fact that their front office, led by President Masai Ujiri, act in a very stubborn manner where they have set unrealistically high price tags on their assets on the trade market, and time after time have shown that they would rather lose their guys for nothing in return in free agency rather than trade them when they still have value and years left on their contract. Fred VanVleet left in free agency, and in his place, the team brought in Dennis Schroeder, a clear downgrade. They also re-signed Jakob Poeltl and drafted Grady Dick, but nothing they have done this offseason has given anyone any reason to believe that they're in for a bounce-back year, yet they're also simultaneously refusing to shift their focus to the future. OG Anunoby has just 1 year left on his current contract, and every report coming out about his situation indicates that he wants to be traded. He will leave in free agency next summer if they don't trade him. They could easily trade him and Pascal Siakam as well, who has just 1 year left on his contract too, and get a big haul in return for them, setting themselves up nicely for a rebuild, but instead, they're content with finishing in 9th place in the Eastern Conference as their best players continue to leave in free agency every summer. It's the biggest case of mismanaging assets going on in the league right now, and no one really talks about it. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below which teams you think will regret the decisions that they made this offseason. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.